Today's webinar is focused really on the soup to nuts of cybersecurity. You're going to walk you through threats, how you do a cyber assessment, how you build your program, not only to respond to, but mitigate, recover, and get back to operational readiness. And we have a great team here. Couple of rules of the road before we jump in. If you want, jump in and post questions in the Q&A, and we'll take them as they go along. We can't communicate with you verbally, but we can communicate with you, meaning that you type up your question, I'll get it to our panelists, and we'll go from there. And we're going to be here for about an hour. And the focus, again, is going to be really ransomware and how do we deal with that. So I'll start off with me. I'm Professor Kevin Powers. I'm the founder and director of the Masters of Science in Cybersecurity Policy and Governance here at Boston College. I'm also a research affiliate and a senior lecturer over at MIT Sloan School of Management. Welcome. We have a great panel here today. And what I'm going to do is walk through with each panelist, and they're going to tell us a bit about themselves, what their role is, and then we're going to dive right in with Doug. So first off, we have Doug Doman. Doug is a supervisory special agent over at FBI Boston. And Doug, why don't you tell us a bit about your background?
Hey, everyone. Thanks, Kevin. Sure. My name is Doug Doman. I'm a supervisor here at FBI Boston. I'm one of two supervisors at the Cyber Task Force. We handle both criminal and national security investigations here in the Boston field office. I've been with the Bureau for about 22 years now, working cybercrime the majority of my career, but I've also had a chance to work internationally and as well as down in DC at our cyber division headquarters. So thanks for everyone's being here and appreciate the opportunity to participate in this great panel.
Yeah, and Doug's also a proud Eagle and an adjunct faculty here at Boston College as well in our cyber program.
That's right.
Next up, we have Simon Taylor. Simon is the CEO and founder of HYCU. And Simon, tell us a bit about you and what you do at HYCU.
Absolutely, Kev. It's great to be here. Simon Taylor, CEO, founder of HYCU. HYCU stands for Hybrid Cloud Uptime. We're the world's fastest growing data protection as a service company. And what we really do is focus on helping customers to protect their data across on-premises, cloud, and SaaS. There's over 30,000 SaaS services in the world today, and about 98% of them remain unprotected, meaning that 80% of the world's data has no capacity to be recovered. And that's really what HYCU is here to help you do.
Great. And Simon, we won't forget, Simon's an Eagle too. He's a research fellow here with our Cyber National Security Program and has been with us. You were here with us before day one, well before day one, as we were building the program as well. Next up, we have Manny Jean Georges, who's with Google Mandiant. And Manny, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do with Mandiant?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. So I'm a manager within Mandiant's incident response practice based in the Northeast. For those of you who don't know, Mandiant is a cybersecurity organization that has built its name primarily on working large and complex incident response investigations to include all different types from ransomware to nation-state actors, financial crime, et cetera. And I've had an opportunity during my tenure at Mandiant to work on and be involved in all of these different types of investigations and lead these investigations.
Excellent. And of course, Mandiant's been with us again before day one with Kevin Mandiant and the team, then FireEye and now Mandiant. So thank you so much, Manny. And now Ben Carr with Halcyon. Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so thanks. I appreciate it, Kevin. My name is Ben Carr. I'm with Halcyon as an advisory CISO for them. Halcyon is squarely aimed at kind of addressing the ransomware issue, providing a solution for ransomware and helping people when they've been hit by ransomware. Myself, I've been in the business for probably about 25 years now. I ran significant programs as an operator, as an operating CISO. I was a former CISO for Qualys. I ran a very large portion of Visa's program. I ran all corporate IT security for Nokia for a while. So been around the block, been there, done that, seen it. Happy to be here and help out on the panel.
No, and thanks, Ben. And Ben, for those of you who don't know, he's usually the moderator at many of these things. He runs a great podcast, webcast, and things along those lines. So I've been on several times. So thanks, Ben, for being here.
Sure.
All right. And Barry is not here right now. He's trying to plug in. They're having some technical difficulties, I guess, getting through the federal system, no pun intended, but he's a global vice president and information security officer with the Federal Reserve System. So once he jumps in, we'll just pivot right to Barry, let him introduce himself. But while we wait, we're going to move forward with Doug. So Doug, let's talk a bit about, for those online right now, talk about your role in the FBI and what the FBI does as it relates to cybersecurity.
Sure. So we have, the third priority at the FBI with regards to cybercrime. And when I say cybercrime, I'm kind of encapsulating both the criminal side of things, which would be crimes that we're looking to pursue subjects and indict them and hold them accountable in court, as well as our national security investigations, which are have kind of a dual mission, which is also to attribute malicious activity to a individual, but also an intelligence mission that drives a lot of the threats that we're investigating in a lot of our activities each year. What I'll do is I'll kind of frame where we fit in the general picture for the federal government with regards to our mission. The 2023 they put out the administration put out a cybersecurity strategy, which is a national strategy. It has 5 pillars. And the second pillar in that is to disrupt and dismantle threat actors. And that's right. That's right in our wheelhouse. We work with partners at all the federal agencies to really investigate crime and attribute that crime and that criminal activity to individuals, and then work with our partners, both domestic and overseas, to hold them accountable for those ransomware attacks. So as far as the FBI's cybercrime program goes, we've got ransomware being a huge priority. They've actually, with regards to that second pillar, created a joint ransomware task force in DC that put out that Stop Ransomware guide. So for those of you that aren't aware of it, there's a great guide about ransomware and about preparing and then responding to a ransomware attack at the CISA.gov website. And that's something that's a product of what the JRTF put out, both with FBI, CISA, and other federal partners in that.
Sure. And Doug, when we talk about ransomware, just for the audience, what do we mean by ransomware, if you don't mind?
So a ransomware attack would be a multi-phased attack where the actor is holding the victim and extorting them for a payment of some sort to either prevent the release of their data or decrypt the data that's been encrypted on their network. That could take multiple phases. There's oftentimes a negotiation that takes place. But what it's made folks realize is that paying that ransom may decrypt data, but it won't necessarily keep their data from being leaked online. And so we have to be kind of aware of how these threat actors are working, what they're doing, and the different techniques that they're using to leverage their access to networks to further impact victims. And so when a ransomware attack takes place, we encourage those victims to, at some point in their response, reach out to the FBI, let us know what you're seeing, and then we can provide back what we have, the intelligence that we have on that threat to help you make, help inform the decision makers on the next steps to take.
Oh, that's perfect. And I'm going to pivot over here to Simon for a minute. So Simon, we know what the threats are out there, and it's ransomware. Can you talk a bit about, and I love going through this because we've done this, Norm, with like the 3 Rs.
Oh, yeah.
A bit about, how this all plays out, and it goes to like a cyber assessment, the data mapping, and then, really backing up your data and disaster recovery. But can you start first with really the cybersecurity assessment? Like, how's that work?
No, absolutely. So taking a step back, right? I think when we look at cybersecurity and we look at ransomware attacks, we think about PDR, prevention, detection, and resiliency or recovery. And I think, there's a lot of sort of noise made around prevention and detection. All of the vendors out there's thousands of choices, there's billions of dollars spent every year to try to stop ransomware attacks from happening. But the simple truth is, Kev, is that, there's way more of them than there are of us. And it's far easier to execute a ransomware as a service attack than it is to protect against one. It costs about $100 on the dark web today to actually pay for white glove service to have somebody execute a ransomware as a service attack. So with that level of that sort of limited barrier to entry, the likelihood of getting attacked is now, it's almost a given. And so I think rather than always focusing on the prevention and detection, what we also have to do is focusing on how we recover when these attacks take place. So what HYCU has done is we offer what we call a free public service, which is called RScore. And you simply go to www.getarscore.org and you can take a free assessment. It's not gated. We don't ask for any information. We don't want to know who you are. But what it does is it allows you to enter all the things you've done to ensure that you're going to be able to recover from a ransomware attack. It'll then score your responses 0 to 1,000, just like a credit score, and it will tell you how resilient you actually are. After you take the assessment, it comes up with a full list of remediation actions. So you can actually get in there and you can change and you can affect your environment to the extent to which if you are attacked, you're actually going to be able to recover. And again, we decided to create this because we thought as a data protection company, yes, of course we love to make money. Of course we want to build a great business. But at the end of the day, this is a true national emergency. And I think, the extent to which we can provide intel and information that will help anybody, anywhere to stop the scourge of ransomware, we think that's a very good thing.
Yeah, and just to be clear on RScore, that was in collaboration with Boston College, MIT, and Kevin Mandiant from Mandiant. So it's really great public service, and I think it's over 100,000, if not more, organizations globally have used it. So take advantage of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to Ben next, and then I'll go right to you, Manny, because you're all part of this too. So Ben, talk a bit about like the ransomware. Like we're talking about like being ready up front, seeing where you are, having your readiness, but then also as part of that readiness, why don't you talk about the solution that you have and you came up with on the tech side?
Yeah, so I think it's important for everybody to realize, as Doug and Simon were talking, like you mentioned ransomware as a service and the cost and how easy it is to obtain. This has really transitioned into a business, right? And so when we think about criminal activity and how the FBI, I think, has traditionally looked at this, like a lot of it was, in the past was kind of the malicious actors, the insider threat, nation states, right? They were going after it for some nefarious purpose. Well, the purpose of ransomware is still nefarious, right? But the motivation is the monetization of criminal cyber activity for a ransom, for extortion, for a reward, right? And so that's completely changed the landscape of how we see this and where we've seen actors, create activity on. So if you think about, a nation state not wanting to burn a 0-day because they're going to utilize it when they really need it, a ransomware actor is happy to burn a 0-day because they're just looking to get to the dollars first before the next guy does, right? And so that's key to this. When Halcyon looked at this, the essential, I guess, foundational component we said is, one, we have to look at this different than the way people normally look at malware and malicious threat actors. The way in which ransomware happens is very similar to normal behavior, normal activity on an endpoint. It's, copying files, moving files, encrypting data, things that your typical EDR is not going to catch. And so, on a day-to-day basis, we see on systems that we're deployed on that this type of activity is just bypassing those systems. Almost all activity that we see where you see, public information where a ransomware event happened, they had other things that were defense in depth. But what Halcyon did is develop an application, an agent that specifically targets and prevents the actions around ransomware themselves. Now, while we believe, and to date, we've been 100% successful in actually making sure that none of our customers have actually been compromised by a ransomware activity, we understand that at some point, potentially, they could get past this. And so the multi-phased approach is the next thing we do is we actually capture the keys as the data is being encrypted. So if you come under this issue where you've been, a victim of ransomware, we can actually look at that key data and we can decrypt that information and essentially provide resilience, not have to go to backups, not have to figure out how you're going to bring those systems up. We can redeploy those keys with the agent, bring the systems back online. And then as kind of a fallback scenario, if that doesn't work, we have the ability in some cases to reverse engineer that key data and help people get back when they didn't even have an agent deployed on there. And then kind of the last piece of this environment is the ability for us to look at the data as it's being exfilled from the network and actually stop that exfiltration of data, right? Because at the end of the day, if you've been a victim of ransomware, yes, you have the recovery and the resiliency you have to get back, but you've also got the brand damage, right? And the protection issue of what was out there, what regulatory issues do I now have to do reporting on because I've got data that's potentially been exposed. So we want to really provide a full solution across the whole suite of where ransomware actually affects, the end customer of the client.
No, that's great, man. And I'm going to get to you, man. I think this is great because it goes to the whole idea of defense in depth. You have all these different solutions in place. You can't just rely on one. It's how you build your whole cyber program. So, Manny, if you could start off with, let's talk about incident response. But before we get into incident response, let's talk about incident planning. How does that play out?
Sure. In regards to incident planning and preparing for an incident, some of the things to think about are some of the more low-hanging fruit and the ways that we actually see ransomware actors get into environments, and ensuring that you're shoring up your environment and your technologies against those methods. So to what Ben said regarding exploits and ransomware actors being very quick to utilize an exploit in as a means of getting into an environment, that's actually something that we've seen become more prevalent over the last couple of years or so, is that attackers are leveraging these exploits and leveraging unpatched systems that they're able to then get into environments. So things like making sure that your external presence, your perimeter is protected by multi-factor authentication. So, the type of things that attackers are going to target, specifically ransomware threat actors, are things like single-factor authentication remote access solutions, whether that's your VPN, Citrix, RDP, other VDI solutions, et cetera. Your vulnerable internet-facing systems for which patches already exist, and other more involved techniques such as, an adversary in the middle type of solution, where they're taking cookies or tokens to be able to get into an environment. So in terms of preparing and protecting against these types of things, it's really making sure that you have those low-hanging fruit items addressed. So security misconfigurations in cloud environments, things like that, where attackers are going to be able to take advantage of that and get into an environment.
No, it's perfect. And I think, hey, Barry, is that you? Did you call in?
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not on video, but my work devices are so secure they're not letting me through. So I'm doing old school today. Apologies.
There you go. That's a plus for the government. What a great endorsement. So, hey, Barry, this is Kevin Powers. Thanks for joining us. And if you could, Barry, what we did on the introductions, why don't you tell folks here a bit about who you are and what you do right now, and then we'll just jump right back into our discussion.
Sure, absolutely. I work as the Information Security Officer for what is known as National IT for the Federal Reserve Bank, which is all of the infrastructure that the Federal Reserve uses to run all of its systems. Its payment systems, its internal systems. That's what I'm responsible for. And I will cite that for the lawyers, anything that I say is definitely my own opinion. It's not necessarily the opinion of the Federal Reserve Banker system, but I'm excited to be part of this panel.
Awesome. And that's endorsed by the federal government that you're excited to be part of this panel. I'll take that. Thanks, Barry. All right. Before we get into really the incident response, aspect of it, because we're building. One aspect too is I want to talk about. I'm going to go to Simon, then to Doug as we jump in. Simon, we talked about. Okay, we're going to have these protections in place, but before you do any of that, you have to know what you have.
Yeah.
Right? You have to know your data. And it's not just about personally identifiable information. That's very important, of course, your customer data. But we're also talking about your business data. And can you talk a bit about that and what I'm going to lead you on this one? Let's talk a bit about what SaaS platforms are and how that impacts a business and organization.
Sure. So, Kevin, you said it really well. I think, it's almost like we've done this before, right? But what's really amazing is that if you go back 30 years, all of our data was in a basement, right? We had on-premises, some of us had mainframes, we had servers, you really had strong levels of control and air gapping between your environment and anybody else's. Then came along the cloud, right? And we started to put data, in other places. We started giving it to Google and Microsoft and AWS. And then all of a sudden, individual application providers said, well, I can put my data and my app in the cloud, and you can run it from there. So if you think about your iPhone, right, you're probably running 100 different applications. In the business world, we call those SaaS, software as a service. Now, when we think about SaaS, I want you to imagine that on your iPhone, after every single application, you had a corresponding button that said backup. That would be ridiculous. You'd have 100 apps and you'd have 100 backups. What do you do instead? You go to the iPhone and you simply turn on iCloud backup and you protect all of your data and all those applications. The problem was that there was nothing like that for the enterprise. There was nothing like that for governments. And so what we said is, wouldn't it be great if we could find a way to protect any SaaS application, no matter what it looks like? So I want you to think about Microsoft Office 365, think about Asana, think about Salesforce, think about Jira. There are literally thousands and thousands of these SaaS applications. And the problem we see is that, companies today don't use one or two of them. The average company today uses over 600 of these SaaS applications. In fact, for those of us who are in Boston or big Red Sox fans, we started working with the Boston Red Sox, and they said to us, we think we've got 5 or 10 different SaaS applications. We probably should back those up. Well, luckily, HYCU has invented something called RGraph that will help you to visualize and see where all of your data is. So we deployed that with the Boston Red Sox, and they found over 900 unprotected SaaS applications. 900. And the Red Sox, as amazing and powerful as a brand it is, it's not a huge organization, but they had 900. We've seen companies with literally thousands, 10,000 plus SaaS applications. And this is a huge problem, Kev, because if you look at the data, over 50% of ransomware attacks today occur through SaaS. So meaning they find an application like Office 365 or Salesforce or what have you, and they go in and they encrypt that data. And then they say to you, if you want it back, pay us. And that's why a majority of these SaaS ransomware attacks are successful. And that's really what we're here to do to help. We help you to visualize all your data, on-prem, public cloud, and SaaS, triage the data so you know which workloads you should be protecting, and then very easily put in recovery policies so that those ransomware attackers aren't going to be somebody you're going to have to say yes to. You can say, no, thank you. I'm going to recover that data right now and get back to work.
Perfect. Thanks, Simon. And hey, Barry, since we pulled you in here, we're really talking, about incident planning before we jump into the incident response and how that all plays out. So if you jump in, you've heard some of this, but from your perspective, what's the best way to really plan for the incident? Like really, when you start developing and implementing that plan, how do you do that?
Yeah, great question. From my perspective, there's a lot of great use cases out there that you can use. NISA has some good recommendations. NIST has some great papers on how to develop an incident response plan. But I would say one of the best ways to really start to hone in on an incident response plan is to have tabletop exercises, right? Come up with real scenarios. Pick one out of the news that you've heard about and walk that through in your org and start to ask questions like, how would we respond to this? How fast would we need to respond to this? Who makes decisions in our organization to turn things off or turn things on or disable, this system or that system? How do we move quickly in order to respond in that case? I've found personally that that's been some of the most powerful ways to really find out where maybe you have weaknesses or maybe where you have strengths and build on that. So that's definitely something that I'd recommend that everyone does in their organization.
Yeah,
Can
I would recommend
on
that too. I was going to say, Ben, I was going to recommend that too. And by the way, the regulators are requiring that right now. Go ahead, Ben, jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say, look, tabletops are great. I'm a huge believer in tabletops, but I see one glaring problem in a lot of organizations when they run tabletops is that they run information security tabletops. right? So the only people involved in the tabletop are the people in the information security team. And that's a recipe for disaster, right? When you run a tabletop exercise, no matter what it is, we're focusing on ransomware today, but no matter what it is, you need to go from the very start to the very end of the process. And that means getting everybody involved in the organization. So your CFO should be involved, right? Your legal officer should be involved. Your CMO, your marketing person should be involved. How are you going to respond? Now, when that happens, you're probably going to want to go to external counsel, right? You're probably going to want to go to external PR firms. They should also be involved. The FBI, right? Like you should have something in that response plan that says, how do we contact the FBI? Who's the name? What's the phone number? Like, do we understand that? Because if you only test the internal pieces, you're going to miss out on some of the biggest things. And the last thing you want in a real incident is to realize you have holes, right? The whole purpose of that tabletop is to identify gap areas, fill them in, and make sure that there's no questions. And specifically when it comes to ransomware, one of the biggest questions everyone asks is, do we pay? Right? No matter how you come out on the advocacy of that, whether you pay or not, you should already have that discussion internally with your CEO, your board of directors, your CFO. And there's probably a table you come up with, like, is it a risk to life or limb or not? How many points do we assign to that? Is it a risk to brand reputation? Is there PII involved? Like, and add up that score. And what's the threshold that you get to where you say, oh, we've exceeded this threshold. Maybe you decide you need to pay. I have my own opinions on paying or not paying. But at the end of the day, you need to understand for your business how you're going to respond. And then in the incident, if your outcome is we made one decision and we're changing it, why did you change it? Like question those things and say, hey, we already tabletopped this. We worked it through. Now we're making a different decision, have material facts changed. So I think Barry's right. Tabletop is the way to go and build a lot of process on it, but do it completely.
Yeah. And what you just referenced, and you stole my thunder, is the incident response team, right?
Yeah.
That's what you need. You have to have part of the plan, the incident response team. And one of the most important things, as the lawyer in the room here, is read your insurance policy.
Yeah.
See what plays out. Because sometimes you'll have your plan and you realize, hey, we have insurance, and you talked about outside counsel. Well, you might get panel counsel who brings in their own forensics team and has the crisis communications, and they don't know anything about you.
Who can you bring in
to have that all lined up and know them? And Manny,
your insurance company may say, hey, you've got to use this forensic company. Now, if ahead of that, you know that and you negotiate and you say, Mr. Insurance Company, we'd like to use X insurance company. Oftentimes they'll allow that, but they want to vet it out first. But you don't want to waste time with a 4-day response window, right? To do notification. You don't want to waste time in that window figuring out how to change that.
Yeah.
And that's right.
That's exactly where I was going to add as well. Understanding your insurance policy. What are they going to cover? What your deductible is. Is it worth it to go to your insurance company and file a claim? But also, as Kevin and Ben just mentioned, understanding what vendors you're allowed to use or able to use as part of your insurance policy. And to kind of circle back to the incident response plan and the tabletop. I think one thing that's also important is understanding what the decision-making criteria is as you go through and ask different questions or go through different points within the incident response. So for instance, who's going to make the decision or when is it warranted to do something like cut off the internet completely? As you may have seen from some of the publicly reported ransomware breaches over the past year, some organizations completely disconnect from the internet where they no longer have an internet presence for some period of time as they investigate and recover from that ransomware incident. So who's able to make those decisions and what criteria is being leveraged to make those decisions?
Yeah, and that goes back to the planning, and then I'm going to get right to Doug, is this already should be baked in. You should already have, if you don't have inside, you might have inside counsel, but you should have your outside counsel who brought in your forensics and crisis communication. So you can at least have the argument of attorney-client privilege. And if something, heaven forbid, happens, you're able to activate all that's taken care of. You don't want to be looking for a law firm or a Mandiant in the middle of a crisis because you're just not going to get that done. It just doesn't work. So everything's up front. So now I'm going to move over to Doug. And Doug, let's talk now. There's an incident. Let's talk about first, what does the FBI do? Like, and let's talk about this too, because there's been like, talk like, oh, do we call the FBI or don't we call the FBI? In a couple of years, actually 2025, you're going to be calling anyways through the new regulations within 72 hours of an incident. But talk about, why should we call the FBI if something happens?
Sure. Well, we certainly want to be a seat at the table. And if I don't say it again, I just want to make sure that everyone understands. You certainly can call me ahead of time. We don't want it to be a scary process, and that's why we do outreach like this. Call me, have the conversation. I can kind of give you a sense of what it would look like. It's generally a very light footprint with regards to what we're going to ask of the victim, because our primary concern is that the victim is able to get back up and operating as soon as possible. I do want to touch on just in addition to kind of what we can provide. Just previously, a lot of the times we'll get pulled in is not the victim reaching out to us, but us having information that we want to provide proactively to a victim who may or may not know they are a victim. And so one of a good tabletop exercise, if think creatively, is what happens if someone knocks on our door, they give us an IP address, a date, and a time. Are we going to be able to look at our logs and figure out where that came from and what exposure we have to that IP address, or similar to what you said about bringing in the different roles from the organization. If there is a network that's terminated, that starts to, depending on the size of the company, employees start to go home and tell their families that there's no internet, and things start to get out to the media, and then the media starts putting out that there's a cyber incident, and the company has to be able to respond to that. So if we don't hear from someone, there are times where we will just reach out as a courtesy to say, look, we understand there might be something ongoing. If there's anything you can provide or anything we can help with, please, let us know and we can help you. I think the appropriate kind of phase of that, when a victim is going through their recovery phase, there's going to be a time in which they're trying to identify what systems are impacted, and they're going to want to immediately isolate those systems. And so, once they have that kind of understood what the scale of the impact is, they're going to start to want to threat hunt in their network with the folks at Mandiant, or if they have the inside capability to do so on their own. Before you get to the threat hunting point, we want to be able to provide some indicators that we might have on that threat. And so calling us either as the threat hunt is going on or prior to, we can provide some data points about the adversary that we know from our casework and our case management, or our case wherever in the country that might be, to provide some indicators that you could look for.
And on that, Doug, I have another question, because we don't often get the FBI on our panels. No, and the questions that come out of, hey, we're negotiating with, the cyber criminals, whether it's a nation state or whatever, and we're negotiating, they're extorting, and there's a ransomware, really, they're asking for money. And now I call you and I'm like, hey, Doug, my company's we're looking, should we pay, should we not pay? And then the risk of paying. Can you talk a bit about those calculations and how those play out?
Sure. We don't recommend paying a ransom because if people pay the ransom, if victims pay a ransom, it perpetuates the problem. So we don't recommend paying a ransom. We can provide the information we know about those negotiations, about what we've heard from other victims that are dealing with that same adversary. So we can help inform the victim. The other thing that I think might be worthwhile to address is that we have a negotiation unit here in every field office. So if there is a threat to life situation, that Ben mentioned it earlier, if there's a threat to someone's safety, it's all hands on deck, and we will pull whatever resources we have at the FBI, be it our cyber action team down in Virginia, or the negotiation teams that we have in our field office, to help coach and make sure that those folks that are involved and impacted have every resource of the FBI that we can offer. Short of that, if it's not a threat to life, like I said, our footprint is a little bit lighter, and we would want to exchange probably phone calls and make sure that you have what you need. And then another thing that comes up is if we want to keep an image, if we want to come seize one of the images or take a look at the image, we would do that in parallel to the victim's own investigation. And one of the things that's been recommended to me recently was that if you do have an encrypted file system that you are going to try to rebuild, if you've seen recently, we've had a couple of good takedowns, one with Lockbit recently, and then Hive and others in the previous year. We are at times able to get the decryption keys, a year or months later after the impact to the victim. And if those file systems are able to be maintained, which could be an expensive endeavor, so this is not going to be appropriate for every victim, but there are chances that we could decrypt that at some point in the future. So if you do have an encrypted state of your environment, it may be worth considering the cost of purchasing or using other storage and then setting that offline to maybe be decrypted at some point in the near future.
Yeah, and one more point, Doug, and then I'll get to our other panelists. If I'm thinking of paying, and I know you're saying again, and that's fine, but I'm just saying, pretend I'm a company, I'm thinking of paying. Part of the calculation is OFAC, right? Is this a sanctioned entity? And do you help with that calculation? Are you able to give me as an organization advice or guidance in saying like, well, that looks like it's not, or that is a sanctioned entity?
Yeah, we would give you what information we had that could inform on that decision. Sometimes the investigation is very mature, and we have a lot of data points that they're able to provide for that intelligence piece. And other times we're just getting up to speed, and a victim might be the first or second victim we've even spoken to. So it all depends on kind of the phase we're in, but we would absolutely provide what we have to offer the victim on making that decision, because it is an important one and it has lasting effects.
Right. No, thanks, Doug. All right, I'm going to jump into Manny with Mandiant.
Yeah.
There's a data breach, overall, what happens? What are you doing? Talk a bit about your job.
Yep, sure. So one of the first things that we're doing is getting as much information as we can from the victim organization, right? So tell me what you know about if in a ransomware instance, oftentimes getting to know which actual ransomware group it is partly determined by, excuse me, what the file extension is of the encrypted files. So often the way ransomware works is after the encryption has actually taken place and the files on your systems are encrypted, a new file extension will appear that's associated with the ransomware. So for instance, in Dharma ransomware, just any variant, often the actual file extension gives away which ransomware group or associated ransomware malware it is. So having that type of information is incredibly helpful to us to be able to say, hey, do we have any intel about this threat actor, about this particular ransomware operator that's going to help us direct how we investigate and what we do first, what we prioritize. So getting information, number one, and then secondly, working with the victim organization to start to get a sense of how did the threat actor get into the environment in the first place, and doing essentially taking some of the same steps that Doug pointed out, threat hunting within the environment to get a sense of where the scope of the incident and where did the attacker actually get to within the environment, and was their data stolen and things of that nature. So making sure that we have an ability to do analysis with some sort of telemetry, for instance. So whatever security product that an organization may be using, whether it's Microsoft Defender, SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, et cetera, and then doing some deeper dive analysis and true digital forensics on systems that were more significantly impacted or that the attacker spent a lot of time on to determine things like, did the attacker steal data from this system? How did they steal data? And in parallel, we're going to be working through the recovery and remediation actions at the same time and the planning for that.
And on that, I'm going to jump in as the lawyer on this too. There's a lot going on there because there's a determination. You don't know what happened yet. So everyone thinks that, something happens, that means, oh, that's a material incident. We have to drop an 8K and put something out. Well, you can't make those decisions till you know what's actually going on. Same with, Is it actually a data? You don't know yet. So it takes time. I mean, that could be days before you make that determination. And that's really where you have the whole team working. Before I get to Simon again, this is awesome. I have Ben, who's a CISO, and I have Barry, who's the head of information security. So I'm going to go to Barry first because he jumped in late. Then I'm going to get to you, Ben. Hey, Barry, we're in the middle of an incident. What is going on with you and who are you working with to really mitigate the situation right now?
Yeah, good question. So we have a dedicated incident response team who would be kind of coordinating the event. Once you determine that we have an incident, we declare an incident, and it's really important that you assign a case owner, somebody that's kind of responsible for the entire incident, as kind of the focal communication point for the rest of the team. And then that incident response team has playbooks that they execute depending on the situation. And this is where it's really important. You talk about, MITRE has a React framework, MITRE's attack framework, right, and MITRE's React framework. That's really, really great reference point, right? And that's where it's so important to prepare. You want to build some playbooks for different types and styles of attack events or incidents, data breaches, right? So you want to make sure that you're prepared and you have some playbooks for how you execute that. So then, they have their playbook, and that playbook determines who needs to be communicated to, who you need to keep in touch with, who are the key players or key owners of systems that you need to make sure that they're in the loop. And then you start, working the problem. Clearly, like what was said, you want to make sure that you assess and you identify what's going on and how the problem has kind of presented itself, how the data breach has occurred. And then you need to focus on how to contain. It's all about containment from there on. How do you kind of plug up any holes? Do you have to down systems? What do you need to do to contain the environment as well as possible? And then, the process is, after contain, you eradicate, and then you recover, and then you definitely do a lessons learned. From there, you do a post-mortem to figure out what went wrong and how you prevent it from happening in the future. But that's kind of a brief approach to how we tackle it.
Perfect. Ben, you're in the middle of your breach. What are you doing?
Look, you're hurting cats in a way, right? Like it's kind of the job is you're trying to figure out how do you contain it? How do you maintain calmness? The last thing you want to do is go around in a stressed environment and not exude confidence that you can handle the situation. As Barry mentioned, I typically have a defined incident response team. I usually act as the incident commander in that role as the CISO, and my job is to make sure that information is getting disseminated accurately, quickly into the right people, and we're not, spreading disinformation around the environment, because that can happen very quickly and then kind of muddy the waters on what we're trying to do. Figure out how to respond, what is the right method of containment to make sure we're not seeing a spread, try to understand what the information is that we've actually had a breach with, and make sure that we're running through our incident response plan and making sure that people are following the playbooks as we've written them, right? A lot of it's trying to keep people on the playbook, make sure that you're looking to find areas where you need to put additional resources or effort to contain the breach. And then, in the back of your head, you're analyzing to see, all right, what's not working here and what do we have to bring up in kind of the post-mortem and the lessons learned to figure out how do we then effectively respond the next time in a different way, right? So it's all about making sure you're getting the most linear path through that incident or breach, and you're not taking detours that are going to slow you down.
Perfect. So Simon, I'm just hit. Oh, will you jump in, Barry? Or
no, that was Manny. Sorry, I was just going to add, what Barry and Ben mentioned about having kind of a defined process is incredibly important. And one of the things that I would like to stress as well is it's an iterative process as you're going through an investigation. So as you're finding indicators of compromise, things that the attacker's doing that you're able to then search for, you're going through that process. That's driving what you're going to do for containment. And then you keep doing that until you've actually found everything and able to then move into eradication.
Yeah, and on this too, and this goes back to what Barry said and we talked about, is this shouldn't be the first time you're doing any of this. You should have at least done one practice run, right? Many more, and figured out that what worked, what didn't work, and also it shouldn't be your first call to Doug is your first call ever to Doug or to the FBI. You should have that relationship because you need to. It's a holistic approach. But Simon, I'm hit with the data breach. Where do you come in here?
Well, I think it goes back to that incident response plan, because in that plan, a lot of folks, when they're doing the tabletop exercises, there's this sort of line in it where it will be, and then we'll recover the data. And I think that you've got to draw a line between how you're going to recover the data, regardless of where it is. And, I think, Manny, you brought this up before, but a lot of times we have folks call us up and they'll say, I didn't check my cyber insurance policy. I didn't realize that none of the products that I'm using are covered. I need to use something else for the recovery. And so one of the things that I would say is when you're going through the process of stipulating in the tabletop exercises and in the incident response plan, what steps you're going to take, make sure that all the technology vendors that you require are actually tied into your insurance. I think that's absolutely critical. Now, when it comes to actually recovering, hopefully, again, you've gone through the process, you've run an R score, you already know how you're going to recover, you've got that step in place. Hopefully, you're using immutable backup so that they're not overwriting the backup with worm, write once, read many, so that nobody can get in and corrupt any of that protected data. These are very, very smart and sophisticated, applications.
They're going to come after talk about backup the data too. Can you talk a bit about it? Because a lot of people think if they have it on the cloud, it's backed up. Can you talk about why that's not
It's a great point. I think we call this at HYCU the myth of our time, because, there's something called the shared responsibility model that governs not only cloud, but also every SaaS application in the world. And what this model essentially says is we will provide you with a service that will have a certain amount of uptime, but the data is yours to control.
Right.
Now, what they don't tell you is that when they say the data is yours to control, they don't necessarily have an option for how to back it up and recover it. So I'll tell you a real story. We got a call from a CIO and a CISO, I won't mention which one, from a major financial institution in New York. And they said, hey, listen, we're a customer. We're having a real problem because we only just became a customer last night. We've had a problem. We've got regulators in here, and they're asking where our second copy is for our Salesforce data and for a variety of other SaaS data. And of course, the response was, well, Salesforce has that, call them. And the regulator was quick to point out, no, it's on you. You need to have control of the data that you're inputting into these systems. And I think this is a really, really critical point, Kev, because for everybody that's using SaaS, all these applications that are sprawling across your company, IT and cybersecurity groups need to get their arms around what SaaS is being deployed, what risk mitigation efforts are in place, what your contract actually says around the shared responsibility model, and you need to keep in place policies and procedures to recover all of your data, regardless of where it's sitting, and that's on-prem, public cloud, and SaaS.
That's perfect. And Simon, I have one other question, because we talk about backup your data. Can you talk about how, it's really disaster recovery? And I want to get to this too, because everyone thinks, okay, I'm good to go. I backed it up. Talk about testing that, because we are talking about incident response. How do you check to see if this actually is going to work when you're hit with a ransomware attack?
Another very real story to just sort of make your point. Backup is easy, right? It's not hard to get data and put it somewhere. What's very complicated is the ability to recover that at any level of granularity. So, we had another customer who had recently come over to us, and what happened was they went to restore with internal snapshotting that they had built themselves. One of the engineers internally had said, backup's not hard. I'll just write some scripts and we'll make this work. Well, when they tried to recover, they couldn't put the data back in the application, which meant that they were down for months and months and months. So again, when you're planning out how you're going to back up the data, look really carefully at, the date of your ransomware attack or the date an incident occurs. Can you recover before that? Can you schedule recoveries? Can you back up regularly? Can you make sure you can get your hands on the data? and more importantly, get it back into production so you can turn back online. Because remember, the cost of a ransomware attack is not just the cost you pay to the bad guys. It's the cost of a business that is shut down for a period of time. And I think that's the real issue.
On that note, like when you look at Change Healthcare was a $22 million ransomware payment, right? But the estimated cost right now, their impact is $1.6 billion.
Right.
That's a much larger number than 22 million, right, in total impact cost. And then, I think Doug mentioned that, they don't recommend, I want to come back to this real quick. The FBI does not recommend paying the ransom, right? I'm not a big fan of it either, because I think it just perpetuates the incentive, right, that they're using. But the bigger problem is we see a marked increase in people who pay a ransom who get attacked again because they paid the ransom, and people know that they can get that out of them again, right? So, you may make it out of this incident with a low ransomware payment, but your movement forward may be just increase after increase after increase and a higher propensity to get attacked because you did that. So you really have to think about the completeness of solution and how you're addressing this holistically, not just with one incident, because it's never one incident.
Right. And then it goes back to everything we're talking about right now too, right, Ben? It's if you have your plan in place, you've tried and true, and it goes, you start from the back end, like this is where I want to be, and then you go all the way back to build out the plan. You'll still have to worry about that, but hopefully you reduce the risk so much it's all in your playbook, you're able to run with it.
Look, I'm not advocating like don't plan. Like you should still plan, right? For the most, you have to approach things from a risk perspective. So, look, the most risky thing that's most likely to happen is the thing that you're, expecting, right? The least risky thing with the least likelihood of happening is that should never ever happen, but you still want to plan for the incidence of that. And in the case that it happens, you have a good response plan. You've tested it out. You know how it's going to go. So exactly right. It's much smoother on the backside, right? That's again why Halcyon's approach is we want to prevent ransomware, but we didn't stop there. We look at if you still get it, we want to be able to provide the keys. And then if you didn't have Halcyon at all, we still potentially have the capability to come in and reverse engineer that and still help you get your data back, right? Without having to pay the ransom and go down all these negative paths that we see as the backside.
I would say that some of the more successful organizations that we've seen that have been hit by ransomware incidents, going back to planning, the incident response plan should have something dedicated or scenario dedicated for ransomware. All right. That ransomware is certainly one of the things in when I talk to CISOs, that's the one thing that keeps them up at night, among some other things. But ransomware is definitely one of the more prevalent and potent items. So making sure you have a ransomware plan as a subsection of your incident response plan, but then on the recovery side, having a specific ransomware recovery plan as well. Disaster recovery planning doesn't necessarily always equate to ransomware recovery planning. They're certainly similar in that, one of the primary intents is business continuity. But to Simon's point, right, you're able to back up the data, but can you restore that data? And there's a number of considerations to take into account when it comes to backups as well. Simon already mentioned, are they immutable, right? So we've certainly seen plenty of instances where threat actors do encrypt the backups for whatever backup solutions already in place, or furthermore delete those backups so that way to inhibit the organization from being able to recover. So there's some security posturing recommendations that we typically have around backups in that regard as well.
That's perfect. And we're approaching time here, so what I'm going to do is pass it over to you, Doug. And if you could, give one takeaway to our attendees, really, with the threat landscape and what they can do to reduce that risk.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. I guess, like we've talked about, have a conversation with an FBI cyber task force before an incident happens. If law enforcement is going to be in your response plan as kind of one of those activities. So we're always open. I get calls daily that ask, hey, who's the cyber task force supervisor? What's their number? Is it still that person? Can we include you in our response plan? Please do have the conversation. If you see me out and about here in Boston, stop me and say hello, and let's get to know each other before we're talking over something that's pretty serious. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll advocate if you haven't talked to the FBI yet and you're out there, like you should. Like it's not a scary conversation. Like they're there to help, and I found them to be very beneficial in the past. As Doug said, they've called me proactively when they see something, and whenever I've had to engage them, they've been very helpful. So I certainly think you should make that connection.
Yeah, and you can make that connection on June 5th at Boston College when we host the 8th annual Boston Conference on Cybersecurity with the FBI, where we'll have the deputy director and I think, if not all of FBI Boston will be there.
Yeah, we'll all be there. Yeah, it'll be awesome, and we're looking forward to it.
Yeah,
I wanted to also mention one thing real quick too, Kevin. If for those that don't know, the way that we push information out about the cases we're working is through CISA.gov. They have joint cybersecurity advisories that we are kind of co-authoring with CISA. So if you haven't been to CISA.gov's website, look for those CSAs, and you'll see the threat hunting, the indicators that I mentioned, all the information that you can help protect you against specific threats that we've published on. So thanks everyone for listening to me here today at the hour.
No, that was great, Doug. And everyone, thank you so much. And what you got to see here today is really, it is a holistic approach. You know, you have to have everything up front. Not one technology is going to protect you, but combining them together, you're going to reduce a lot of risk, and then you bring in the experts. You have to have that team approach, and you bring in the right people, and you have to vet them out. And today you had the right people on the phone. So I thank everyone here. I thank Doug, Simon, Manny, Ben, Barry for calling in. Thank you so much. We're going to take care of you with a BC mug for sure for going above and beyond with that. And then onto tabletops, I'm heading off to the IBM Cyber Range right now with 2 of my classes, and that's exactly what we're going to do over there. So with that, everyone, thank you for your time. And panelists, thank you so much for all you do for Boston College and our team here. Take care.